Assetto Corsa EVO Early Access is finally here, and you can all start right now, or you can take a moment and watch this video while I walk you through all the things that are new in Kunos' latest, well, masterpiece, hopefully. We're going to take a look at the new graphics engine. I asked if it had a name, and I think we decided to just call it Steve. Then we're going to take a look at the performance it has, and there are some nice surprises compared to ACC, for example. Of course, as well, we are going to talk about how it drives and what is new in the physics model, the tires, the aerodynamics, for example, whatever we have available right now. And then I want you to just keep in mind, we're talking about the early access release and actual early access, not like some other studios are doing these days. But this is a version 0.1. This is the first playable state of the game. Literally everything is going to improve, but I think we have a really not quite raw diamond here on our hands, so let's get right into it. The first time you open the game, you are probably going to get stuck in the garage a little, like I still do after playing this for a couple of months now, because the detail that they are able to put into the cars is mesmerizing in a way. You can even, I think the headlights and the taillights especially, they give you a good glimpse of the amount of detail they have put into that, the way each object of the car is really reflecting and interacting with the light is just crazy good. You probably just walk around the car a little here, and I urge you to actually do this and explore this a little, because all the different materials are going to reflect light a little differently depending on how they would in real life. So a plastic screen on the side of the car is going to reflect light differently than metal or whatever material you'll find on your car, and then depending on how it's painted. If you look into the headlights, for example, you'll see that internally in that headlight, it will already reflect the light emitted from the actual light source. You will see in the taillights, for example, on the BMW, the 3D laser lights, they are inside that taillight, and you can see it and almost touch it in a way, and you can see that it's the 3D structure being the light source, and it's not just some weird point in, I don't know, the 3D space where the light comes from. It's like this entire 3D piece that is emitting the light, and I found that quite mesmerizing, and I still do every time I open the game. But it goes on in the interior of the car where all the detail that they could get hold of is going to be modeled. Some cars are going to have different gear levers because they have an H pattern version or a sequential version. For example, the MX-5 Cup has that. Then a lot of cars are going to have displays. Some even have several displays, and all of this is also going to be modeled. And if these displays have a function, well, you guessed it, this is also going to work, and you probably want to set up the buttons for the so-called performance mode, which is going to cycle through the screens at a later point in the game. Also, there is more to it than just a screen. Most modern sports cars, especially, they can change the dampers, the response of the steering wheel, and these sorts of things. That is going to be part of the performance modes in the future as well, for example. Then just look at all the materials also inside the car. They're reflecting the light based on what material they are. Every single button here is, yeah, kind of taken from the real life counterpart, reflecting light in the correct way, lit up in the correct way with the correct color. And if the car has ambient light, you're able to adjust it. And it's, I don't know, it's the most immersive graphics engine I've ever seen. So let's go into the details. What else is there? And you'll find that it's not just the cars that look good, the entire game looks pretty good. And there are a lot of effects in there that are very nice. Everything where they can, they're trying to use physically based rendering so that everything kind of behaves correct, looks correct, reflects the lights, lets it through, and all that in a correct manner. For example, there'll be the sky that is going to be volumetric, including the clouds. The fog you'll see on track is going to be volumetric, so the light is kind of diffusing in it, and at some point you will not be able to look very far, which especially for the Nordschleife is going to be really needed, because that place has one of the weirdest weather changes on Earth, from warm and sunny to flooded in a matter of seconds, and it's a place that tends to be very foggy at night, for example. Then, of course, yeah, the trees and the foliage and all that, It's also all going to be correct. You can say, of course, hey, this has all already been there in the Unreal Engine, so why did they step away from that? You would be correct. Of course, this is all as well there in other engines out there that they could use. But if we remember the early phases of ACC, it took them a ton of work to get the Unreal Engine to work with a sim racing title. And if you look at Rennsport, you can also see that they are still struggling to make this work on a fundamental level. I don't know how many years after they kind of started with the game. So what Kunos did here is they made a purpose-built engine for sim racing, with sim racing in mind, while including as many features that are out there in other DirectX 12 based engines. And I feel this at this stage already you can see the positive impact of that, of making it focused on sim racing. If you compare to ACC, and I'll share some performance stats later, you will see the clarity of the image, the sharpness, which is a weakness of ACC, is on another level already today in EVO. And the other bit that we always had in ACC, no matter how high your frame rate was, you always had these micro stutters in ACC that you just couldn't get rid of because they were so inherent to the Unreal Engine. And once you play EVO, you will see how insanely smooth this game runs. Imagine iRacing on 200 FPS. Imagine the more ultimate, I feel, also runs pretty smooth. This is what EVO now also does, while, in my opinion, yeah, I'm biased, but no, I really find that it does look better already. And we're talking about version 0.1. There's a lot to come down the path with optimizations, new features, and some things that aren't quite ready yet. So how does this perform? Let's have a quick look here. Of course, when you're coming out with a new engine, again, we're talking about version 0.1 here, there's going to be concern about the variety of hardware that is coming in now with the early access, and you can expect there to be improvements down the line until version 1.0. So we're gonna see improvements in performance, especially on lower end hardware most likely, and also we're going to see more visual improvements over time as well. So let's see where we are standing. And if you remember, in ACC, we always had the issue that no matter how high your FPS were, we do have these micro stutters. So the frame times of every 100 or every 200, every 1000th frame or something, you will have a stutter in there. And these are making the experience on ACC, regardless of FPS, a bit of a stuttery experience that is just something you cannot get rid of. And I can already tell you that in AC EVO, it will be hard to convey in a 60 FPS video, but once you get to play it, you will immediately notice it. That once you go around, the image is so smooth, and you can play with a lot less FPS than you could play in ACC and still have a smooth experience. It was no problem for me to drive around with 90 FPS, for example, and still have a smooth experience, not really be concerned at all with it. While in ACC, if it drops to 120 for me or so, I will very much notice. So you can already see some of the improvements of the purpose-built engine there. Then here's a comparison. That yes, the FPS are going to be lower. I tested here with the maximum settings you can have, bar a few that I turned 1 or 2 clicks lower, where I think this personally for me it doesn't matter so much. And I did the MSAA was down 1 step from 8 to 4x, and then I disabled the grass basically because it's completely irrelevant to me. And both of these clicks alone give 10 FPS each kind of on my system. Of course, this is a 4090 with a 7800X 3D. So it is going to be a powerful combo here. And of course, this is most likely not reflective of everybody else's PC, but I just want to give you the ballpark here. And I'm averaging 160 FPS with that roundabout, and the lows, they are just dropping to 100 in the worst places on track. Single player, no AIs, it's going to look different in different scenarios on different tracks. All of that is clear, but just give you a first impression here. And then if I turn down the settings, and this is the Amadeo Castorino profile here, I'm gaining another 100 FPS basically on average if I turn everything to the minimum setting. So I hope that for most of you, there will be an option to get a playable experience regardless of your hardware, kind of, as long as you're on the 20 or 30 series in the GPU area, or I don't know, the 6000 series from AMD or something like that, and not have a 3, 4, 5 generation old CPU. So of course that's going to be a requirement. It doesn't quite compare to ACC in terms of maximum performance, but in terms of smoothness, it already outperforms it, and I think that is quite remarkable. Of course, now we can finally talk about the driving. I know this is what you've probably been waiting the most for. And if you're coming from ACC, and if you followed this channel in the past, then you know, okay, there were some issues in ACC, in particular regarding leniency of the tire, allowed amount of slip of the tire, grip of the tire, kind of the lack of possibility to lose the car, it just being a little too easy. And the other big thing in ACC is, or was, that the suspension kind of can weird out and the cars become really bouncy in situations. And I would say to both of these, they are solved in Assetto Corsa EVO. Let's go into a bit of detail here. For the suspension stuff, actually this still goes back to the beginnings of the new engine, and there was still the time when ours was there, and he still helped develop new tools that they were going to use in order to put cars in the game. And essentially, they can now model cars with better detail, and part of that is that they can, as they say, measure the suspension and damping ratios better at any state of compression of the damper, and this translates to a smoother transition from when the suspension is engaged and the damper is engaged to when the bump stop is actually hit. And in ACC you can get situations where the transition is not smooth, where the suspension does not give enough resistance and you just smash into the bump stops, and then you get this whole situation with the cars being super bouncy. And this is something that you should not see in EVO anymore. Of course, if you do, report it so we can keep fixing it. On the tire level then, it was too lenient in ACC, I would agree. And there are going to be a few changes to the tire in EVO that I believe you will feel quite immediately. One thing is that the tire has a kind of smaller grip peak depending on the car and the tire you're actually using. And the grip drop off after the peak is going to be sharper. This means that cars will eventually they can be in a situation where they are very hard or impossible to recover, which I feel is something that wasn't quite as present in ACC. For example, also the rain in ACC was just way too grippy. So there were things that weren't quite right anymore. And I would say also the tire on EVO is certainly already, in this early stage, a step in the right direction. What leads to that is, for example, is that there have been some new values introduced in the tire model. For example, there is now a speed sensitivity that is helping to change the car's behavior when you're increasing the speed, making it more sensitive, making it more risky and tricky to go near and above the limit when the car is at high speeds, because the tire is not able to maintain these slip angles or provide grip if you're overdoing it at these speeds. So in the end, it's going to be more risky driving at higher speeds, because you can lose the car and you can get into situations where you're not able to recover it. The same can also happen without actually going fast, because in general you will not be able to lean as much onto the tire before it lets go, and it lets go much sharper than it did in ACC. And even the top drivers, when they start with the game, take the Porsche Cup for example, once they start dialing in with the setup, make it more aggressive to get rotation, you'll quickly get to a point where it is simply too much and it becomes hard to control. I, for example, if I'm trying to make the setup more aggressive here, find myself spinning on corner entry, because it can happen quite suddenly that the rear end is not finding the grip, and then even if you counter steer, you're probably going to be too late. Same thing can happen if you already have a bit of a slide throughout the corner, and then you put the power down, that on exit the car is just not going to find that grip, and you spin out again, not being able to counter steer in time to kind of stop the inertia, the momentum of the rear end there, and bring the car back in line. The other thing, and it's similar, or it's connected to that, but it's a bit isolated as well, is that the center of steering in ACC was always a bit vague and unresponsive. And it kind of comes from the same thingy that the tires needed too much slip in ACC to produce grip. So you needed to steer quite a bit to see any reaction of the car. And I would say this is also now pretty different in EVO, where we need much less steering angle to get a response from the car. And also in line with that, because the tire response, the force feedback has something available to respond as well. So this kind of dead center in terms of force feedback in EVO is going to be much reduced or gone, depending on what your perspective on that is, depending on the car you drive, the tire you drive, the wheel you have, and all these things kind of come into play. But overall, you should feel much more connected to the car around the center of steering, getting away with smaller inputs to change the direction of the car, and you'll also find yourself dancing the car more on the limit with smaller inputs around the center, which was previously not possible in ACC. One of the key things that I think changes the game fundamentally is the change from the somewhat dynamic track in ACC, which increased the grip level in general, but had a fixed ideal line where it was going to be and where the track dried up, to a fully dynamic track modeling that we now have in EVO. That means that when you're not driving on the ideal line, you are still putting rubber down. And the rubber is going to put down how often you drive there. Of course, the rubber is going to be put down how you drive there. So if you come with a heavy car at high speed with a high slip, that is going to put more rubber down than when you're just cruising about there, for example. Or when you're locking a tire, that's going to put more rubber down than if you're just, I don't know, driving along there. Or if you happen to do a spin or a burnout that puts a lot of friction on the tires, that is also going to put down more rubber on that particular part of the track. And so this way we will have quite different grip levels across the track. Of course, there's going to be the ideal line that people tend to use because it's the fastest around the corners. And of course, this is going to rubber in. But outside of that line, you will still see different grip levels depending on how many cars were driving there. And all that is early days. Version 0.1, the fundamental system is there, and once we go through the early access phase, there's going to be fine-tuning happening to that for sure, but I definitely want to know your experience with that. What you have to think as well is the resolution of that dynamic track is 40 times 40 centimeters, so the entire track consists of tiles of that size. And on a normal track, you'll quickly get to a couple 100,000 up to 1 million of these tiles, and all of them carry an individual information about the amount of rubber that is laid down on them, of course, which material they are in the first place, having a different grip level, and for example, the amount of water that is on them. And just driving along through a corner means whatever speed, you are having 4 tires on 4 different tiles, each with a different parameter in terms of grip and water level, for example. And that alone brings the track much more alive, because the car actually finds different grip on different tires throughout the corner as you are driving over these tiles. And if you put your mind to that, and if you try to feel in that, you might get a sense of what I mean. Everything feels more alive. The car does more tiny things throughout a corner as you come across different tiles with different grip levels, and it just makes the game an entirely different experience than it was in the past with ACC, where it was very predictable the amount of grip that you were going to have throughout an entire corner. This shall be it for a overview of Assetto Corsa EVO and what has actually changed under the hood, what you should look out for to experience. I hope your PC is beefy enough to run this on decent frames and decent settings. I hope your first feedback is giving you the information that you want. Else, always feel free to come to Discord, put your questions. We're going to collect what everybody else sets their FFB up to, and I'm sure we can find something that works for everyone. Make sure to try and break the cars. If the setup is available, go extreme. Let's find the things that are now working and improve that throughout early access. But I think we have a very good start here, and then in the next videos we'll dive deeper on some of the aspects I mentioned in this video. For now, I wish you a lot of fun with Assetto Corsa EVO, and then we'll see you shortly. Like and subscribe, all of that. Bye.